The taste of ash had been in my mouth for 3 days when I first noticed the silence, and by then it was already too late to do anything but watch the world come apart at its seams. I remember the exact moment, standing in the observation gallery of Bastion Primus, my fingers wrapped around a mug of cold Ricaf, staring at the pict screens that showed the eastern wastes where the greenskin horde had been hammering our lines for 17 consecutive months. The screens flickered with static-laced images of empty trenches, abandoned weapons, and the hulking shapes of Xenos warriors standing motionless among the ruins like broken statues in a forgotten garden. My name is Korvath Seln. I was 43 years old, a mid-tier analyst in the Administratum Xenological Assessment Bureau, and I had spent the better part of 2 decades documenting the patterns of greenskin warfare across a dozen contested worlds. I understood the Xenos as one understands a natural disaster, predictable in their chaos, reliable in their violence, constant as the void itself. They roared, they charged, they killed with a horrible exuberance that bordered on joy. Their weapons should not have worked, crude assemblages of scrap metal and belief, but they did, because the greenskins believed they would. This was the fundamental law of their existence. This was what made them simultaneously predictable and unstoppable. The silence when it came felt like a physical thing, like the moment before a hab block collapses, when the supports have already failed but gravity has not yet noticed. I set down the mug and leaned closer to the nearest screen. The pict feed showed Trench Network 17, a jagged scar in the planet's surface where we had lost 4,000 soldiers over the past 6 months. The greenskins had taken it 3 weeks ago, overrunning our positions in a tide of green flesh and rusted blades. Our seismic sensors had reported constant activity since then, excavation, construction, the rhythmic pounding of whatever passed for industry in their primitive minds. But now the sensors showed nothing. No vibrations, no movement, just the faint hiss of wind across dead ground. Analyst Seln. The voice came from behind me, clipped and precise. I turned to find Sub-Lieutenant Han, her uniform crisp despite the perpetual grit that coated everything in this hellish place. She saluted, more from habit than protocol. "I'm forwarding the overnight reports from all forward observation posts. You need to see these." I took the data slate from her, scrolling through the entries. Every post reported the same phenomenon, cessation of greenskin activity beginning approximately 72 hours prior. No attacks, no movement, no Vox traffic on their crude communication channels. Several observers reported visual contact with individual Xenos, but noted unusual behavioral patterns and lack of aggressive response to Imperial presence. Lack of aggressive response, I repeated, tasting the ash on my tongue again. They don't have that. It's not in their nature. "I know, sir," Han said quietly. "That's why I brought it to you." I glanced at her. She was young, maybe 25, with the kind of earnest competence that usually got people killed in assignments like this. She had survived 8 months on this world, which meant she was either lucky or smart, possibly both. Right now, she looked neither. She looked afraid. "What's your assessment?" I asked. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Either they're dead, sir, or they're planning something we don't have a framework for understanding." I nodded slowly. Both options were bad. The first because we had no intelligence suggesting what could kill an entire greenskin horde simultaneously. The second because the Xenos didn't plan, not in any meaningful sense. They reacted, they adapted. They overwhelmed through sheer momentum and weight of numbers. Strategic deception was not in their repertoire. "I'll escalate this," I said. "Send out drone sweeps. I want visual confirmation on every major greenskin concentration within 50 kilometers, and pull the atmospheric data for the past week, chemical weapons, biological agents, anything that might explain a mass die-off." "Sir." She saluted again and left, her boots clicking against the rockcrete floor. I stood alone in the observation gallery, watching the static-filled screens, and felt the first cold thread of unease worm its way into my chest. In 20 years of studying the greenskins, I had learned one fundamental truth about them. They were constant. Empires rose and fell, planets burned and were reborn, but the greenskins remained, an eternal green tide washing across the galaxy. They were a known quantity in a universe of unknowns, and that made them almost comforting in their predictability. The silence was not predictable. The silence was new. And new things, in my experience, were always worse than familiar horrors. The drone sweeps began at dawn, such as it was. The planet's sun was a dim red smear behind perpetual smoke clouds, casting everything in shades of rust and shadow. I watched the feeds in real time, transmitted directly to my workstation in the sub-level analysis chamber. The drones flew low over the contested zones, their optics capturing everything in high-definition clarity that somehow made the wrongness of it all more acute. Thousands of greenskins, maybe tens of thousands, scattered across the wastes like discarded toys. Some stood upright, arms hanging at their sides, faces tilted toward the smoke-shrouded sky. Others sat in loose groups, backs against rubble, weapons lying forgotten in the dirt. A few had collapsed entirely, sprawled across the ground in postures that suggested they had simply stopped mid-stride and fallen. None moved. None reacted to the drone's passage overhead, though the machines were well within visual and auditory range. I zoomed in on one cluster near the ruins of what had once been a water reclamation facility. 7 greenskins, various sizes, arranged in a rough circle. Their skin had lost some of its vibrant green coloration, fading to something duller, grayish. One had its head in its hands, massive fingers pressed against its skull. Another stared at the ground between its feet with an intensity that suggested it had been doing so for hours. A third had carved something into the dirt, crude lines and shapes that my pattern recognition protocols flagged as potentially significant, but could not interpret. "Get me a closer view," I said to the drone operator, a tech adept named Voss, whose face was half hidden behind augmetic optics. The drone descended, hovering 3 meters above the greenskins. At this range, I could see the shallow rise and fall of their chests, the slight tremor in their limbs. They were alive, technically, but something fundamental had changed in them, something I couldn't quantify with the tools at my disposal. One of them, the largest, its hide covered in scars and crude tattoos, slowly raised its head and looked directly at the drone. For a moment I thought it might react, might roar or throw something or give us any indication that it was still the creature we understood. Instead, it simply stared, its eyes dull and unfocused, and then lowered its head again, as though the effort of looking had exhausted it. "Behavioral analysis?" I asked Voss. The tech adept's augmetics whirred softly as he processed the data. "Consistent with extreme psychological trauma, sir. Dissociation, catatonia. In human terms, this would indicate complete mental collapse." "They're not human," I said automatically. "No, sir. But the patterns are analogous. Whatever they're experiencing, it's fundamentally incompatible with their continued function." I saved the footage and flagged it for immediate review by the senior staff. The drone continued its sweep, documenting hundreds of similar scenes. Everywhere, the same eerie stillness, the same abandoned weapons, the same greenskins standing or sitting or lying among the ruins, doing nothing, responding to nothing, as though they had collectively decided that existence itself required too much effort. In one location, the drone found a body, actually dead this time, not merely inert. It lay face down in a crater, one arm outstretched, fingers dug into the dirt. The flesh had begun to decompose with unnatural speed, sloughing away from the bone in wet sheets. The smell, even transmitted through the drone's chemical sensors, was overwhelming, rot and copper, and something else, something sharp and wrong, that made the readings spike in ways I'd never seen before. "Get a sample," I said, "and scan for pathogens, anything that might explain this." The drone deployed a collection appendage, extracting tissue and fluid samples into sealed containers. The readouts began populating my screen immediately. Cellular breakdown, organ failure, catastrophic immune system collapse. But no foreign agents, no virus, no bacteria, no toxin. The greenskin's body was simply failing, as though it had forgotten how to be alive. "This doesn't make sense," Voss said, his augmetic voice flat, but carrying an undercurrent of confusion. "Greenskins are remarkably resilient. Their biology is redundant, regenerative. Even catastrophic injuries rarely kill them quickly." "Time of death?" I asked. "Approximately 18 to 24 hours ago, based on decomposition rate." "But sir," he paused, mechadendrites twitching. "The cellular breakdown began before death. The organism was decomposing while still alive." I felt my hands grip the edge of the workstation. "That's not possible. The data is unambiguous, sir." I stared at the screen, at the dissolving corpse of something that should have been nearly immortal through sheer biological stubbornness, and felt the cold thread of unease in my chest begin to twist into something sharper, something closer to fear. "Continue the sweep," I said. "Document everything. I need a complete picture before I brief command." The drones flew on, and I watched, and the silence of the Xenos stretched out like a wound across the world. I presented my findings to the command staff at noon. General Karthos presided, a granite-faced veteran of 40 years' service whose left arm was a crude augmetic replacement. Beside him sat Colonel Waaagh of the Engineers, Margos Thren of the local Mechanicus delegation, and a handful of other senior officers whose names and ranks blurred together in the perpetual exhaustion that characterized life in a siege zone. I projected the drone footage onto the main display and walked them through my analysis, keeping my tone clinical, professional. I showed them the standing greenskins, the abandoned weapons, the decomposing corpse. I presented the atmospheric data, no anomalies, and the pathological findings, no infectious agents. I concluded with a simple statement: as of this morning, greenskin military activity in our operational zone has ceased entirely, cause unknown, implications uncertain. General Karthos studied the images for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. Could this be a ruse, feigned weakness to draw us out? "Unlikely, sir," I said. "The greenskins lack the cognitive sophistication for large-scale deception. Their combat doctrine is fundamentally straightforward." "Could they be dying of disease?" Colonel Waaagh asked. "Something we can't detect. The pathology suggests catastrophic systemic failure, but with no identifiable pathogen. It's as though their biology is simply giving up." Margos Thren leaned forward, his red robes rustling with the movement of concealed augmetics. His voice was a modulated rasp, more machine than man. "The Xenos are a psychically reactive species. Their technology functions through Gestalt belief rather than sound engineering principles. Their physical resilience is partially maintained through collective psychic reinforcement." He paused, optics whirring as they focused on the displayed images. "If the Gestalt field were to destabilize or collapse, the secondary effects would likely manifest as we are observing: biological dysfunction, behavioral abnormalities, eventual death." "What could destabilize their Gestalt field?" Karthos asked. "Unknown, General. Theoretically a psychic weapon of sufficient magnitude. A mass trauma event affecting a critical percentage of the population, or—" He trailed off, optics clicking rapidly. "Or," Karthos prompted, "an internal cascade, a psychic contagion originating within the greenskin population itself, spreading through their shared consciousness." The room fell silent. I thought of the carved symbols in the dirt, the greenskin staring at nothing, the body decomposing before death. A psychic plague. It fit the data better than anything else I could imagine, but it raised more questions than it answered. "Can it affect us?" one of the junior officers asked, voice tight. "Doubtful," Thren said. Human psychic sensitivity operates on different principles. We are individuals, they are a collective. Our minds would likely be incompatible with whatever is affecting them. Likely, the officer repeated, not sounding reassured. General Carthos straightened in his chair. Recommendations? Maintain current defensive posture, I said. Continue surveillance. If this is a die-off, we should let it run its course. If it's something else, I hesitated. We need more information. Someone needs to go out there and examine them directly. Carthos's eyes fixed on me. Volunteer yourself, analyst? I hadn't meant to. I was a functionary, not a soldier. But something in the silence of those images, the wrongness of it, had hooked itself into my mind. I needed to understand. It was the same compulsion that had driven me into xenological study in the first place, the need to categorize, to explain, to make sense of the senseless. Yes, sir, I heard myself say. Carthos nodded slowly. Very well. Assemble a reconnaissance team. Waaagh provide armored transport. Thren, I want one of your tech priests along with monitoring equipment, and analyst Seln. He leaned forward. If this is a weapon, I want to know how to replicate it. If it's a plague, I want to know how to contain it. And if it's something else entirely, I want to know what we're dealing with before it gets worse. Clear? Clear, sir, the briefing concluded. I walked back to my quarters through corridors that smelled of sweat and gun oil, and the recycled air of a hab block pushed far beyond its intended capacity. My hands were shaking. I told myself it was fatigue, or low blood sugar, or the stimulants I'd been using to stay functional through 18-hour shifts. I did not let myself consider that it might be fear. We departed at first light the following morning, a Chimera armored transport carrying 8 soldiers from the 73rd Infantry, a Medicae named Varen, a junior tech priest designated Sigma 77, and myself. Corporal Maquis commanded the squad, a wiry woman with a bionic eye and the kind of calm competence that came from surviving too many deployments. She briefed us tersely as the Chimera rumbled through the outer defensive line and into the contested zone. Stay close, stay alert. We encounter live hostiles, we withdraw immediately. Our job is observation, not engagement. Understood? Everyone nodded. The soldiers checked their lasguns with practiced efficiency. Varen reviewed his medical supplies, lips moving silently as he counted. Sigma 77 interfaced directly with the Chimera's sensors. Mechadendrites plugged into data ports, monitoring everything. The landscape outside was a vision of industrial hell. Collapsed factories, crater fields, the rusted skeletons of burned-out vehicles. The sky pressed down like a lid, smoke and ash filtering the light to a perpetual twilight. We passed through what had been a residential district, now just jagged walls and broken furniture scattered across the rubble. I saw a child's toy half buried in the dirt, a crude doll with button eyes, and felt a twist of nausea that had nothing to do with the Chimera's motion. First contact, Sigma 77 announced, his augmetic voice crackling through the internal vox. 300 meters ahead, 6 individuals, non-hostile posture. Maquis ordered the driver to slow. We approached cautiously, the Chimera's engine growling in the stillness. The greenskins came into view, 5 seated, 1 standing, all motionless. The standing one was enormous, easily 2.5 meters tall, its hide scarred and burned. It faced away from us, head tilted back, arms hanging loose. Stop here, Maquis said. Disembark on my mark. The rear hatch opened with a hydraulic hiss. We filed out, weapons raised, fanning into a defensive formation. The greenskins didn't react. The big one didn't even turn around. I approached slowly, recording everything on my data slate. The greenskin's skin had definitely changed color, faded to something between olive and gray. Their breathing was shallow, irregular. One had dried blood crusted around its nose and mouth. Another had torn at its own arms, leaving ragged wounds that hadn't healed properly, the flesh around them necrotic and black. By the throne, one of the soldiers whispered. What's wrong with them? I knelt beside the seated greenskin, examining it more closely. Its eyes were open, pupils dilated, unresponsive to my presence, even when I waved my hand directly in front of its face. I checked for weapons. It had none, and noted the strange symbols carved into the dirt around it, the same shapes I'd seen in the drone footage, repeated obsessively. Sigma 77, are you getting this? I asked, highlighting the symbols with my slate scanner. Affirmative. Patterns suggest linguistic content but do not match known greenskin glyphs. Analyzing. Varun moved among them with his medical scanner, taking readings. Vital signs are extremely depressed, he reported. Heart rate 30% below expected baseline, brain activity minimal. It's like they're shutting down. Can you communicate with it? Makis asked me. I stood facing the big greenskin still standing with its back to us. Xenos, I said clearly. Can you understand me? Nothing. No response. I circled around to face it directly. Its eyes were open, staring at nothing, and there was something in those eyes that made my throat tighten. Not aggression, not even recognition, just a vast empty sorrow, deep as the void between stars. I've seen that look before, Varun said quietly, in the psych wards, terminal patients, people who've given up. They don't give up, I said. It's not in their nature, they fight until they die. Then maybe, Varun said, they've found something worse than dying. The words hung in the air, sour and heavy. I turned back to the symbols carved in the dirt, the obsessive repetition of the same alien shapes, and felt that cold thread of fear twist tighter in my chest. Sigma 77, any progress on translation? Preliminary analysis suggests these are not words in the traditional sense but conceptual markers. The patterns correspond to psychic resonance frequencies associated with negative emotional states, despair, futility, cessation. Cessation of what? Everything, analyst Seln, cessation of everything. We moved deeper into the contested zone, following the coordinates of the largest greenskin concentration the drones had identified. The landscape grew worse, more bodies, more standing stones of living Xenos locked in their silent fugue. We passed a group of 40 or 50 clustered around what had been a crude shrine to their gods. The shrine was torn down now, its components scattered and broken, and the greenskins sat among the ruins with their heads bowed like penitents in a cathedral. One soldier, a kid barely out of basic training, made the sign of the Aquila as we passed. "This is unnatural," he muttered. "The Emperor's hand is on them surely, punishment for their evil." I didn't respond. I'd seen enough in my years to be skeptical of divine intervention, but I couldn't deny the feeling that something profoundly wrong had happened here, something that transcended normal categories of warfare or biology. We reached the main encampment an hour later. It sprawled across several square kilometers, scrap metal shelters, crude fortifications, the burned-out hulks of captured Imperial vehicles repurposed into whatever passed for greenskin architecture. Smoke rose from scattered fires, but there was no other sign of activity. The place should have been teeming with life, loud with the constant roar and bustle of thousands of Xenos. Instead, it was a graveyard that breathed. "Throne above," Makis whispered. "Thousands of them. Thousands of greenskins scattered across the encampment in loose groups or alone, all silent, all still. Some sat, some lay sprawled on the ground, some stood in place, swaying slightly like trees in a wind only they could feel. The air stank of rot and something else, something that made my sinuses burn and my eyes water. "Chemical analysis?" I asked Sigma 77. "Elevated levels of decay byproducts, also detecting trace amounts of unknown organic compounds, possibly pheromonal and..." He paused, mechadendrites twitching rapidly. "Psychic resonance, strong, growing stronger." "Growing?" Makis's hand tightened on her lasgun. "From where?" The tech priest pointed toward the center of the encampment, where a large structure loomed above the others. Something that might have been a command post or a headquarters, crude but substantial. "The source is there. I recommend extreme caution. We advanced in formation, moving between the silent greenskins like ghosts among ghosts. None of them reacted to our presence. A few turned their heads slightly, tracking us with dull eyes, but made no aggressive moves. I saw one, smaller than the others, maybe an adolescent, scratching the same symbols into the dirt over and over, its fingers worn bloody. Another was weeping, thick tears cutting tracks through the grime on its face, its mouth open in a soundless keen. "This is wrong," one of the soldiers said, voice tight. "Sir, this is wrong, we should leave." "Steady," Makis said, but I could hear the strain in her voice too. We reached the central structure and paused at the entrance. It was larger than I'd realized, cobbled together from shipping containers and reinforced panels, the walls covered in layers of paint and grime. And those symbols again, everywhere, painted in black and red, and what looked disturbingly like dried blood. The same circular design, the same vertical slash, repeated hundreds of times in sizes ranging from tiny to massive. "Sigma 77, what is that symbol?" I asked, uncertain, but the psychic resonance is strongest where it appears. It may be a focus, a transmission vector. For what? For the contagion, analyst, for whatever is destroying them. I looked at Makis. She looked back at me, her bionic eye whirring as it adjusted focus. "Your call, analyst. You're the specialist." I was the one who'd volunteered. I was the one who needed to understand. I took a breath, tasting ash and rot, and nodded. "We go in." The interior was dim, lit by dying lumens and the faint glow of bioluminescent fungi growing in corners and crevices. The air was thick, humid, harder to breathe than outside. The walls were covered in more symbols, more paint, layer upon layer, creating a chaotic tapestry that hurt to look at directly. I felt pressure building behind my eyes, a dull throb that worsened the longer I stared at the designs. "Don't focus on them," Sigma 77 advised. "They are designed to affect consciousness, primitive but effective." We moved deeper, following the strongest psychic readings, until we reached a central chamber. And there, seated on a throne built from welded scrap and broken weapons, was the largest greenskin I had ever seen. It dwarfed even the biggest specimens we'd encountered outside, 3 meters tall at least, maybe more, its muscles like slabs of stone beneath scarred green-gray hide. It wore armor of sorts, heavy plates etched with those maddening symbols, and its head was massive, the skull thick enough to turn a Lascannon shot. Its eyes were open, watching us, and unlike the others, there was awareness in that gaze. Terrible, crushing awareness. Makis raised her lasgun. "Identify yourself, Xenos." The greenskin's mouth moved. Its voice, when it came, was like stones grinding together, deep and slow and filled with a weariness that seemed to age the universe itself. Was Grackle, warboss, leader of millions, killer of thousands." It paused, and its massive hands clenched slowly into fists. "Now I am nothing, less than nothing, a question with no answer." "What happened to you?" I asked, stepping forward despite Makis's warning gesture. "What did this?" The greenskin's eyes fixed on me. "I thought," it said simply, "for the first time in my existence I stopped fighting long enough to think, to ask why. Why do we fight? Why do we kill? What is the purpose of endless war?" Sigma 77's optics whirred rapidly. "Impossible." Greenskins lack the cognitive architecture for abstract philosophical inquiry. "Impossible," Grackle agreed. "Yet here I am, thinking, understanding, knowing." It leaned forward slightly, the throne creaking under its weight. "Do you know what I discovered, little human? I discovered that there is no reason, no purpose, no meaning. We are built for war, shaped for violence, and violence is meaningless. We kill and die across 1,000,000 worlds, and none of it matters. The universe does not care. The gods do not care. We are a joke without a punchline, and the laughter has stopped." "By the throne," Varen whispered. I felt my pulse hammering in my throat. "And you spread this Through your psychic field, you infected your entire species with nihilism. Not infected, Grackle said. Enlightened, I showed them the truth. And truth once seen cannot be unseen. Truth once known destroys everything built on lies. You're killing them, I said, all of them. Your entire race. Yes, Grackle said, and there was no satisfaction in its voice, no triumph. Only that vast, terrible sorrow. Because the alternative is to keep fighting, keep killing, keep pretending that any of it means something. And I cannot unknow what I know. I cannot unfeel what I feel. Better to end it. Better to let the silence come. Muckis fired. The last bolt struck Grackle in the shoulder, burning through armor and flesh. The greenskin didn't flinch, didn't even seem to notice. Muckis fired again and again, each shot hitting center mass, and still Grackle sat there, watching us with those unbearably sad eyes. It's not working, one of the soldiers said, voice cracking. It is working, Sigma 77 said. Look, it's dying, it simply doesn't care. He was right. I could see it now, the way Grackle's breathing had become labored, the way blood oozed slowly from the lash wounds, without the normal furious clotting response. The greenskin was dying, had probably been dying for days, but death was coming slow because even its body had lost the will to fight. How did you learn to think? I asked desperately, needing to understand. What changed? What made you question? Grackle's gaze drifted past me, focusing on something I couldn't see. I killed a human, it said softly, a soldier. He was dying, bleeding out, and I stood over him and he looked up at me and he said, the massive head lowered. He said, "What's the point?" And I had no answer. I raised my weapon to finish him and I realized I had no answer, and without an answer I could not bring myself to strike. And standing there frozen, I began to think, and once I began I could not stop. One human, I said. One dying soldier did this. One question, Grackle corrected. One question that shattered everything. Muckis fired 3 more times, her face pale and drawn. The last bolts burned through Grackle's chest, and this time the greenskin sagged forward, blood pouring from its wounds. But its eyes remained open, fixed on me. It will spread, it said, voice failing. Beyond this world, through the Gestalt, every greenskin touched by my consciousness will feel what I feel, will know what I know, will stop fighting, will stop believing, will stop. Will contain it, I said, not believing it myself. You cannot contain truth, little human. You can only witness it. You can only... The voice trailed off into a wet rattle, the massive body slumped sideways, the throne collapsing, and Grackle fell like a toppled monument, hitting the ground with a crash that shook dust from the ceiling. The silence that followed was absolute. Sigma 77's sensors screamed. Psychic pulse, he announced, broadcasting across the Gestalt field. It's not stopping. The transmission continues post-mortem. Can you block it? Muckis demanded. No, it's already propagating across the planet, across the system, possibly further. The Gestalt field spans light years. Every greenskin connected to this particular psychic network will be exposed. I stared at the corpse of Grackle, at the symbols covering every surface, at the blood pooling beneath the shattered throne. How many? I asked. How many are connected to this network? Sigma 77's optics flickered. Tens of millions, possibly hundreds of millions. The Gestalt field is vast and interconnected. Without more data, I cannot provide precise estimates. Throne, Varen breathed. We're watching an extinction event, a species-wide suicide. Not suicide, I said quietly. Enlightenment. At least, that's what it called it. We stood in that dim chamber, surrounded by mad symbols and the smell of death, and I felt something shift in my understanding of the universe. I had spent 20 years studying the greenskins, categorizing their behaviors, predicting their movements, treating them as a problem to be managed. I had never considered that they might be capable of this, that they might be capable of despair. "We need to leave," Makis said. "Now, if that psychic pulse is still broadcasting, we don't know what it might do to us." We retreated, moving quickly through the encampment. The greenskins still hadn't moved, but something had changed in the air. The psychic pressure I'd felt before was stronger now, heavier, like invisible hands pressing against my skull. Several of the soldiers reported headaches, nausea, a ringing in their ears that wouldn't stop. "Move faster," Makis ordered. We reached the Chimera without incident, piled inside, and the driver gunned the engine before the hatch had fully sealed. We roared back toward our lines, leaving the silent encampment behind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were fleeing from something far worse than enemy fire. I spent the next 6 hours in debriefing, recounting everything I'd witnessed to General Karthos and his staff. Megos Thren listened intently, his optics flickering as he processed the information. When I finished, describing Grakul's final moments and the continuing psychic broadcast, the room fell into heavy silence. "Recommendations?" Karthos asked finally. "Immediate sector-wide quarantine," Thren said. "If the psychic contagion is spreading through the Gestalt field, we must prevent any greenskin from leaving this system. Orbital interdiction. Shoot down anything that tries to leave." "And if it's already spreading," Colonel Vire asked, "then we observe, document, and prepare for a universe with significantly fewer greenskins." Thren's voice carried no emotion. "From a strategic perspective, this is advantageous to the Imperium. The greenskins are one of our most persistent threats. Their effective elimination would free considerable military resources." "Assuming we don't suffer secondary effects," I said. Everyone looked at me. "The psychic field is collapsing, but it's still there, still broadcasting. We don't know what happens when a psychic network of that magnitude dies. There could be warp disturbances, reality breaches, any number of unpredictable phenomena. Which is why," a new voice said from the doorway, "I am here." We all turned. The figure was small, draped in black robes trimmed with red, a rosette gleaming at her throat. Her face was severe, carved from weathered stone, and her eyes were the pale gray of winter ice. She radiated authority the way a reactor radiated heat, invisibly, unavoidably. "Inquisitor Valdane," General Karthos said, standing, "we were not informed of your arrival. You are now." She strode into the room, her retinue filing in behind her, 2 armored wardens carrying storm bolters, a hunched figure in grey robes whose face was hidden behind a bronze visor, etched with warding sigils. "I have been monitoring your Vox traffic. A psychic contagion spreading through the greenskin Gestalt field. A Xenos war boss driven to nihilistic philosophy by a single existential question. This is my domain, General. You will provide me full access to all data, all specimens, and all personnel involved in the investigation." "Of course, Inquisitor," Karthos said stiffly. Valdane's gaze swept the room and landed on me. "You encountered the source. You spoke with this Grakul. You will accompany me. The rest of you are dismissed." The command staff filed out, some relieved, others resentful. I stood alone before the Inquisitor, acutely aware of how small and powerless I was in her presence. She studied me for a long moment, and I had the uncomfortable sensation of being dissected without anesthesia. "Tell me everything," she said. "Leave nothing out. Every detail, every word, every sensation. I will know if you lie or omit." So I told her. I described the silence, the standing greenskins, the symbols, Grakul on his throne, the confession of existential despair, the continuing psychic broadcast. I told her about the soldier who had asked, "What's the point?" and unknowingly triggered the collapse of an entire species' reason for existence. When I finished, Valdane stood motionless for several seconds, her face unreadable. Then she turned to the robed figure behind her. "Your assessment, Vex?" The figure, Vex apparently, tilted its head. When it spoke, the voice was thin and strained, filtered through layers of augmetics and chemical suppressants. The Gestalt field is fragmenting. I can feel it even from here. Millions of minds falling silent, not into death but into something worse. Conscious extinction. The Xenos are dying of understanding. Can it be stopped? Valdane asked. No, it is already systemic. The psychic contagion has achieved critical mass. Across this sector, possibly across multiple sectors, the greenskins are experiencing the same cascade. Within weeks, perhaps months, the population will be effectively non-viable. And the risk to us? Minimal. Human psychic architecture is fundamentally different. We might experience minor disturbances, headaches, dreams, unease, but the contagion is tailored to the greenskin Gestalt. It cannot take root in isolated human minds. Vex paused. However, speak, Valdane commanded. There is a secondary concern. The Gestalt field, as it collapses, is releasing enormous amounts of psychic energy into the immaterium. This energy is chaotic, unstructured, suffused with despair and futility. It may attract attention from entities that feed on such emotions. Daemons, Valdane said flatly, or worse. The Inquisitor paced, her boots clicking against the rockreed floor. How long before the collapse is complete in this sector? Based on current propagation rates, approximately 30 to 40 standard days. Valdane stopped, facing me again. You understand the implications of what you've witnessed, Analyst Seln. This is not merely a battlefield curiosity. This is a potential extinction event for one of the galaxy's most pervasive Xenos threats. It is also a vulnerability. If word of this spreads, if humanity's enemies learn that the greenskins can be destroyed through philosophical contamination rather than military force, it could destabilize entire war zones. You're going to classify it, I said. I am going to erase it, she corrected. This world will be scoured. All witnesses will be reassigned or terminated. The data will be sealed under my authority, and you, Analyst Seln, will be accompanying me to ensure that I have a complete understanding of what transpired here. I'm not a soldier, I said. I'm an analyst. You are whatever I require you to be, Valdane said, and there was no hostility in her voice, no anger, just the flat certainty of absolute authority. You have seen something few humans have witnessed, the death of an idea. The moment when belief fails and reality collapses. I need your expertise. You will provide it. It was not a request. I nodded, my mouth dry. Good, Valdane said. We depart within the hour. General Karthos will be informed that you are being requisitioned for further study. Gather your personal effects and report to my shuttle. She turned and strode from the room, her retinue following. Vex paused at the threshold, the bronze visor turning toward me. You should be afraid, Analyst, the Psyker said softly. What you witnessed is spreading, mutating. By the time we understand it fully, it may be too late to contain the consequences. Consequences for the greenskins? I asked. For everyone, Vex said, and then was gone. I packed quickly, a few changes of clothes, my data slate, a worn copy of the Tactica Xenologica I'd carried for years. My quarters felt suddenly claustrophobic, the walls too close, the air too thin. I thought about Grackle's words. What's the point? A simple question, a devastating question, one that had collapsed an entire species' reason for existence. I thought about the soldier who'd asked it, dying in the dirt, bleeding out, confronted with the futility of his own death and unconsciously weaponizing that futility against an enemy he'd never understand. Had he known? Had he realized what he was doing? Or had it been pure chance, the right words at the right moment, a psychic bullet fired blind into the dark? I thought about the Imperium I served, the endless war, the trillion souls fed into the machinery of eternal conflict. The planets burned, the generations sacrificed, all to maintain a status quo that was itself a kind of slow death. What was the point? What was the meaning of it all? I forced the thought away. That path led nowhere good. I focused on practical concerns, what equipment I'd need, what data I should bring, what resources the Inquisitor might require. I did not let myself think about what it meant that a species could die of understanding. That truth could be weaponized. That despair could spread like a virus. The vox bead in my ear crackled. Analyst Seln, you are expected at Landing Bay 3 immediately. Acknowledged, I said and shouldered my pack. The Inquisitor's shuttle was sleek and black, bristling with auger arrays and weapon systems that seemed excessive for a transport. Valdane was already aboard, reviewing data on multiple holoscreens simultaneously. Vex sat in a restraint harness, head bowed, muttering to himself in what might have been low Gothic or might have been something older and stranger. I strapped in as the shuttle lifted off, the acceleration pressing me back into the seat. Through the viewport, I watched Bastion Primus shrink below us, the siege lines spreading out like infected veins across the planet's surface. The greenskin encampments were clearly visible, dark stains on the landscape, motionless, dead or dying. Where are we going? I asked. Orbital station, Valdane said without looking up. I have a research team standing by. They will examine your reports, conduct interviews, attempt to reconstruct the exact mechanism of the psychic contagion. We need to understand how a single question triggered a cascade failure in the Gestalt field. And then we determine whether this can be controlled, whether it can be weaponized, whether the Imperium can benefit from this accident. I felt my stomach clench. You want to replicate it. I want to understand it, Valdane corrected. Control follows understanding, and yes, if this phenomenon can be induced deliberately, it would provide a strategic asset of incalculable value. Imagine greenskin warlords driven to despair, their armies collapsing into catatonia, entire Waaghs dissolved without a single shot fired. The resources saved, the lives spared. Or, I said carefully, it mutates, spreads to other species, spreads to us, and we find ourselves asking the same question that destroyed the greenskins. What's the point? Valdane finally looked at me, her ice-gray eyes unreadable. You are not the first to voice that concern, Analyst. It has been noted, and you will continue your analysis regardless. This is not a matter of philosophical comfort. This is a matter of survival. The shuttle broke atmosphere, and the stars emerged from the smoke-shrouded sky like old scars tearing open. I stared at them, countless and cold, and wondered how many worlds out there were experiencing the same silent death. How many greenskins were standing motionless, asking questions they'd never asked before, discovering truths they couldn't bear to know. Vex stirred in his harness, his head lifting. It's spreading faster than I predicted, he said. The Gestalt field is destabilizing across multiple subsectors. I can hear the silence. It's beautiful, terrible, beautiful. Control yourself, Valdane snapped. I am controlled, Inquisitor, but even controlled I cannot ignore what I sense. The greenskins are dying, yes, but something is filling the void they leave behind, something that feeds on despair and futility and the death of meaning. It is waking, it is hungry. Specify, Valdane demanded. I cannot. It has no name that I know. It is not a daemon, not precisely. It is a concept given form, the embodiment of nihilism, and it is growing stronger with every greenskin that falls silent. Valdane's jaw tightened. Estimated time until manifestation? Unknown. But soon, days perhaps, weeks at most. I thought of Grackle dying on his throne, whispering about truth that could not be unknown. I thought of the symbols carved everywhere, psychic markers transmitting despair across light years. I thought of the soldier who'd asked what's the point, and accidentally created a weapon that killed not bodies but souls. And I thought, we did this. Humanity did this. Not through strength or strategy or technology, but through our own exhaustion, our own despair, transmitted like a virus into an enemy that had no defenses against existential dread. What did that make us? What did that make the Imperium? The orbital station came into view, a massive construct of grey metal and flickering lights, bristling with lance batteries and void shields. The shuttle docked smoothly, the airlock sealing with a hiss of pressurization. Valdane unbuckled and gestured for me to follow. "You will have quarters assigned. Rest briefly if you must, but I expect you in the primary research facility within 2 hours. We have a great deal of work ahead of us." "Yes, Inquisitor," I said automatically. I followed her through corridors that smelled of recycled air and machine oil, past armored doors and checkpoints manned by stone-faced wardens. The station was enormous, far larger than I'd realized from outside. Entire sections were devoted to research, others to imprisonment, others to purposes I couldn't identify and didn't want to. My quarters were small but functional, a cot, a desk, a basin, a single lumen casting a sickly yellow glow. I sat on the cot and stared at my hands, which were shaking again. I tried to remember when they'd stopped shaking and couldn't. A soft tone indicated an incoming Vox transmission. I activated the receiver. "Selm." "Analyst, this is Corporal Makis." Her voice was tight, strained. "I don't know if you can receive this, but we've been ordered back to the encampment. Full battalion. They want us to burn it. Burn everything. The greenskins, the structures, the bodies. Erase all evidence." "When?" I asked. "Dawn. Local time. I needed someone to know what we saw there. What that thing said. It's true, isn't it? It's all pointless. All of this." I closed my eyes. "Corporal, don't," she interrupted. "Don't give me the official line. Don't tell me about duty and sacrifice and the Emperor's will. I've been fighting for 12 years, Analyst. 12 years of blood and death and loss, and I've never questioned it because there was always a reason, always a purpose. But now," she exhaled shakily, "now I can't stop thinking about what it said. What's the point?" And I don't have an answer. "The point," I said slowly, "is that you keep fighting. Not because it means something, but because stopping means the silence wins. Because despair is a weapon and we don't hand weapons to our enemies." "That's not much of an answer." "No," I admitted. "It's not, but it's what I have." Silence on the line. Then understood. "Analyst. Makis out." The connection terminated. I sat in my small yellow-lit quarters aboard an orbital station I hadn't chosen to be on, working for an Inquisitor I hadn't chosen to serve, investigating a phenomenon that might destroy everything I understood about the universe, and I wondered if Gracul had been right. Maybe the laughter should stop. Maybe silence was the only honest response to a cosmos this vast and indifferent and cruel. But then I thought of Makis, burning the encampment at dawn. I thought of the soldiers who would keep fighting, keep dying, keep pretending that any of it mattered, because the alternative was to stand still and rot like the greenskins. And I realized that the point wasn't meaning, the point was motion. The point was refusing to stop, even when stopping made more sense, because stopping meant admitting that Gracul had won. I stood, washed my face in the basin, and prepared to report to the research facility. I had work to do, analysis to complete, data to process. I would keep moving. I would not stop laughing, not yet. Not today. The research facility was a maze of laboratories and containment cells, staffed by tech priests and biologist savants, who moved with the efficient dispassion of people who'd long ago traded curiosity for protocol. Valdane led me to a central chamber where hollow displays projected three-dimensional models of the greenskin gestalt field, showing its collapse in real time. Great swaths of green light flickering and fading to gray, like stars dying across a map of the galaxy. We have confirmed propagation across 17 subsectors, one of the tech priests reported, his voice flat and mechanical. Estimated greenskin population affected, 230 million and climbing. Mortality rate approaching 70% among infected populations. The remainder exhibits severe behavioral abnormalities consistent with depressive psychosis. Time until total collapse? Valdane asked. At current rates, 90 to 120 standard days until effective extinction of all Gestalt-connected populations in the affected region. Regional containment? Impossible. The Gestalt field extends beyond our capacity to interdict. We estimate the contagion will reach neighboring sectors within 40 days, possibly sooner if isolated greenskin populations migrate and carry the psychic contamination with them. Valdane's expression didn't change, but I saw her hands tighten slightly. Projected long-term consequences? Unknown. We have no historical precedent for a psychic extinction event of this magnitude. Secondary warp disturbances are likely, possible manifestation of immaterial entities drawn to the psychic void. Long-term stability of the Gestalt field itself is questionable. It may collapse entirely, it may reform with altered characteristics, or it may persist as a kind of psychic dead zone, hostile to all consciousness. I stepped closer to the display, watching the lights fade. 230 million. And that was just the beginning. By the time this was over, how many would die? How many would stand silent in the ruins, asking questions they'd never asked before, and finding no answers that could sustain them? Analyst Eln, Valdane said. You will work with Magos Drell here to compile a comprehensive analysis of the contagion mechanism. I want to know exactly how a single existential question triggered a cascade failure. I want to know if it can be induced deliberately, and if so, how. You're really going to weaponize this, I said. I am going to understand it, Valdane said. What comes after understanding is not your concern. She left, her wardens following, leaving me alone with Magos Drell and a dozen other researchers. Drell was a hunched figure, more machine than man, his face replaced by a smooth mask of polished bronze, etched with circuit patterns. He regarded me with optics that whirred and clicked as they focused. You spoke with the source, he said. You witnessed the moment of revelation. Describe the war boss's mental state in precise detail. So I did. I spent hours recounting every word, every gesture, every flicker of expression in Grakul's eyes. Drell recorded everything, cross-referencing my observations with psychic readings, behavioral models, xenobiological data. Other researchers worked around us, sampling tissue from greenskin corpses, analyzing the psychic symbols, attempting to reconstruct the exact psychic frequencies that had spread the contagion. It was tedious, exhausting work, but it kept me moving, kept me from thinking too much about the lights fading on the display, the millions dying in silence, the question that had no answer. Hours blurred together. I drank recaf that tasted like burned plastic and ate ration bars that tasted like textured despair. I reviewed footage of the encampment, the standing greenskins, Grakul on his throne. I listened to recordings of Vex describing the psychic collapse, his strained voice cataloguing the death of meaning with clinical precision. And slowly, piece by piece, a picture emerged. The greenskins were a psychic gestalt, their consciousness linked and reinforced across vast distances. They believed in war, in violence, in the joy of combat. And that belief made them real, made them strong. But belief was also their vulnerability, because belief could be challenged, certainty could be questioned, and once doubt entered the gestalt, it spread like wildfire through dry grass. Grakul had been a war boss, dominant, powerful, his psychic presence magnified across the gestalt field. When he'd experienced existential despair, when he'd begun to question the purpose of existence itself, that doubt had radiated outward with the same intensity as his previous confidence. And because the greenskins were fundamentally psychic creatures, because their reality was shaped by collective belief, the doubt had infected them all. It was elegant in its horror, a psychic pandemic of meaninglessness. "Can it be induced?" I asked Drell finally. The tech priest's optics flickered. "Theoretically, if one could introduce a sufficiently powerful existential crisis into a dominant greenskin psyche, and if that crisis achieved the correct psychic resonance, it might trigger a similar cascade. However, the conditions required are extremely specific. The target must be both psychically powerful and philosophically vulnerable, and the trigger must be profound enough to shatter their fundamental worldview." "So it was luck," I said. "The soldier who asked what's the point just happened to say exactly the right words at exactly the right moment to a greenskin capable of understanding them, correct? The probability of replicating such an event deliberately is vanishingly small." I felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Relief because this couldn't be weaponized, couldn't be turned into another tool of war. Disappointment because that meant we couldn't control it, couldn't stop it, couldn't do anything but watch it spread. "What about containment?" I asked. "If we isolate affected populations, the Gestalt field is non-local," Drell interrupted. "It exists partially in real space and partially in the immaterium. Physical isolation is insufficient. The psychic contagion will continue to spread as long as any greenskin remains connected to the field and exposed to the psychic contamination." "Then we're watching an extinction event," I said flatly, "and there's nothing we can do." "Incorrect," Drell said. "We are observing, documenting, and analyzing. This is data, Analyst Seln. Unprecedented valuable data, the collapse of an entire species' psychic gestalt in real time. We may learn more from this event than from centuries of conventional study." I stared at him, at his bronze mask and clicking optics, and wondered if he understood what he was saying, or if he'd long ago traded understanding for observation, meaning for measurement. "I need rest," I said, acknowledged. "Report back in 6 hours." I left the research facility and walked through the station's corridors, past sealed doors and checkpoints, until I found an observation deck. It was deserted, the lights dim, the viewport showing the planet below, a brown and gray sphere shrouded in smoke, already half dead even before the greenskin collapse. I stood at the viewport and looked down at the world where millions were dying in silence, and I thought about Grackle's question. What's the point? What was the meaning of any of this? The war, the death, the endless grinding of flesh and metal against flesh and metal across 10,000 years of galactic conflict? I didn't have an answer. I wasn't sure anyone did. But I knew one thing. If I stopped moving, if I stopped working, if I let myself stand still long enough to really think about it, the silence would take me too. Not the greenskin silence, but something worse. The human silence. The realization that we were grinding ourselves to dust for reasons we'd long forgotten, maintaining an imperium that had become its own purpose, fighting wars that justified themselves through sheer momentum. So I would keep moving. I would document, analyze, report. I would serve the Inquisitor and complete my assignment and do my duty, because duty was motion, and motion was the only defense against despair. I would not stop. I would not ask. I would not think. Not yet. Not today. Not until the silence came for me too, as I knew eventually it would. Because some questions once asked can never be unasked, and some truths once known destroy everything. 3 months later, the greenskin population in our sector had collapsed by 94%. The survivors were scattered, broken, incapable of organized warfare. The Imperium declared it a strategic victory, redeployed military assets to other fronts, and classified all documentation of the actual cause under inquisitorial seal. I was reassigned to a new posting, a new world, a new Xenos threat. I continued my work, documenting, analyzing, filing reports that would be read by people who would make decisions I would never know about. But sometimes, late at night in whatever quarters I'd been assigned, I would think about Gruckle, about the war boss who'd stopped fighting long enough to ask why, about the soldier who'd asked what's the point, and unknowingly killed millions, about the lights fading on the display, stars dying across a map of the galaxy, and I would wonder how long until someone asked the same question about us, about humanity, about the Imperium and its endless war and its trillion sacrifices. How long until we stopped fighting long enough to think? How long until the laughter stopped? I never spoke these thoughts aloud. I never wrote them down. I kept them locked inside, hidden beneath layers of duty and protocol, and the constant motion that kept me functional. Because I understood now what happened when the laughter stopped. I had witnessed it, and I would do everything in my power to ensure it never happened to us, even if it meant never asking the question, even if it meant living in a lie, because some truths are too terrible to bear, and some silences are more merciful than any answer.